Hi, everyone. My name is Cheryl Hutto, as most of you know by now, and I am really pleased to introduce my friend Lisa Walts. Lisa and I have been co-facilitating some caregiver support groups for the Alzheimer's Association, and Lisa is just practically a walking encyclopedia of various kinds of dementia, and I will let her introduce herself. And we're going to talk today about the stages of dementia and what's going on in the brain. So welcome, Lisa, and thank you.
Hi, Cheryl. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to give you guys a brief overview of myself. So I actually, way back, older than I'm going to tell you how old I am, graduated with degree in math and computer science. And I worked in that field for many years. And then in about 2010, 2009, my mother was diagnosed with atypical Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. And so I actually was lucky enough to be able to take some time off to care for her, first in her home, and then in a assisted living, and then finally in a nursing home. And during that time, but I knew nothing about dementia, nothing about caring for someone before I started this journey with my mom. And I kind of learned how to navigate the challenges of dealing with my mom, but also dealing with the healthcare system that kind of surrounds older adults and what happens when you get dementia. So I decided actually in 2013 to switch careers. I went back to school at BU. I got a master's in social work as a geriatric social worker. And I started working at McLean Hospital in the inpatient geri psych units there, which was probably the best teaching I'd received. And then I went on to work in a nursing home, and I currently work in an assisted living in Cambridge, Mass. That also has a memory care neighborhood. I started volunteering for the Alzheimer's Association quite a few years ago, and I do support groups. One of them was Cheryl. I do a lot of educational talks that are free to the public, to the communities, and I also train our staff at Cadbury on the 8 to 12 hours of dementia care training that they need every year.
I have learned so much from you in the couple of groups that we've been running together, and which is really why I wanted to have you here today, because you're just so well versed in all kinds of dementia. And Lisa, today I know that we have agreed to talk about dementia in the brain and so the three broad stages of dementia, right? So go ahead. Tell us about dementia and what parts of the brain it affects.
Okay. So any kind of dementia, be it Alzheimer's, which is right now we know is probably the most prevalent form, but any kind will affect all areas of the brain at some point during the progression of the disease. It might be at different times, and for every single person, the timing will be different. So everyone who has the diagnosis of dementia is what I call an N of 1. They are not like anyone else with a diagnosis of dementia. Having said all that, there are some broad categories that we can kind of look at. So the first thing to know, and sometimes the most often that we see, is kind of the short-term memory problems, right? Someone asks you a question, and then 5 minutes later, they'll ask you again, right? So that is something, that is a part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is basically the short-term filing system in the brain. If that doesn't work, not only will they not remember what you said, they won't actually remember that they asked you the question.
Right.
So this is where we start to see people missing appointments, using notes a lot, things like that.
So excuse me, Lisa, this would still be the mild cognitive impairment portion, right?
Right,
Okay.
right. So, and then, it will travel through the brain, right? So it will start to affect the ability to speak, to actually turn words into something that's vocal, or to understand what's coming into the brain. It will change vision. And it's not that your eyes have gone bad, is that your brain is not processing what your eyes are telling it, right? Same thing with hearing, okay? It will affect the frontal lobe right here, which is part of the brain that deals with kind of insight and judgment. It's that part of the brain in 17-year-old boys that everyone says, what were they thinking? We know now, because we could see it at MRIs, that this part of the brain in an 18-year-old girl is developed, but in a male is not. Okay. So we can actually see that they develop that differently, right? And so people lose the insight. They might not even understand that they have dementia, but they lose judgment. So this might be where they walk outside in the middle of winter without a coat on.
Right.
It then kind of attacks the long-term brain memories, and what you'll see is it's a first in, last out. So, right. So it basically is rolling back time in some ways. And interestingly, what we do see in a lot of people who have Alzheimer's specifically is that they kind of end up in their, they think they're kind of in their prime, in their 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s. They're raising children. That seems to be the era that has stuck with them besides childhood the most.
Oh, wow, interesting.
There is one part of the brain that's really important to know about, and that is something called the amygdala, and that is where we process emotions. So there's a part of the brain that regulates how we respond to emotions, and that will have been affected by all forms of dementia. But the part of the brain that understands emotions, the amygdala, does not get damaged. It is there until death. And so one of the things, and there's lots of other education programs about this, is that the fact that someone can still feel love and safe and being needed, and can also still pick up your anxiety and everything else, is one of our tools at kind of late stage dementia, where we can still connect with the person.
Right. And that's really important for people to know, I think, that never goes away.
Right. Right. And it doesn't.
We had talked about the stages of dementia. So now that we know a little bit about where in the brain all of this happens, what are the broad stages? And I know you'd mentioned to me earlier that, there's various schools of thought on how many stages, but 3 broad stages, right? Okay.
So there are 3 broad stages. We call them, there are different names, but most people call them early, middle stage, and late.
All right.
So the middle stage tends to be the longest, all right, in terms of years. And of course, we never know how many years someone has after they've been diagnosed. But it can be many. It can be somewhere between 3 and 15, right? So the early stage is where you start to see short-term memory loss. That's usually, and especially with Alzheimer's, that's one of the first things that you see. The inability to remember that they asked you a question, the inability to remember what you have said, right? And this can be one of the most aggravating things for a caregiver, okay? You also might start seeing depth perception issues. So oftentimes that can look like, if there's a busy carpet, someone who has dementia will reach down and try to pick something up off the carpet because they're seeing it in 3-dimensional. But when you kind of get to that and you have depth perception and problems judging distances, this is where you might also see, for instance, a lot of dings show up on the car, right?
Exactly.
So, that's kind of one of the signs, right? You might have some problems word finding and following conversations. And this can be because the brain is slower to process. It can be that they are not able to actually understand a word. Their brain cannot process it. It can be, they might say, oh, I repeat that. They might say, what'd you say? And often it's because they're not sure they got all the words, or while they might actually have heard it, the brain can't process the word. So while it's important to always look to make sure there's no vision change or hearing change, that the hearing aids are in, they work, the batteries aren't dead, the brain is still also having problems processing what's coming in.
Okay.
Sometimes you'll see fine motor skill. So this is where we might see handwriting start to change.
Right.
Okay. Difficulty with complicated tasks. So this could be something like they always do, like Thanksgiving's coming up, right? So someone who used to do Thanksgiving every year for the past 60 years, right, suddenly can't put that dinner on the table in a timely manner and can't multitask,
Right.
right? So they're complicated tasks and they can't get it all together.
Right.
Trouble planning and organizing, same type of thing. Can you plan a dinner, right? Can you organize the dinner? Can you plan your day even? If you get up in the morning, do you forget what you need to do, right? And then sometimes you start to see an attention span issue. So they're watching you, they're following you, and then you can kind of see them their eyes start to kind of just drift away. Often it's because they're no longer understanding and comprehending what's happening. Mm-hmm. Okay. This is where you also might see the very beginning of what we call lack of initiative. And that is often because when we initiate something, we have to plan what we're about to do, right? And if you can't plan well, your default then is to not do it.
Exactly. Right.
Okay. So we can start to see things like that. In the middle stage, you'll start to see increased forgetfulness. This is where they might start to not understand that it's 2020, in which case, yay for them right now, because no one wants to be in 2020. But they might think it's 1980. They might not understand that their kids are growing or have grandchildren, right? They might think they still live in a home they don't live in anymore, even before they got to, if they're in a residence, right? Right. This is where personal care and other tasks might start to deteriorate. So this is, you might notice that they put their bra on outside their shirt, right? Or they forget to kind of zip their pants, or they're trying to put both their legs into one pant leg, right? They get confused. They might not change their clothes anymore, right? Because, they don't really know that processing of taking my clothes off and putting my clothes on becomes too difficult. Vision and movement. This is where sometimes you will actually see the gait of a person, the stance of a person will actually widen, right? They'll walk with their feet further apart than they used to. They're starting to have balance problems. They're starting to not understand precisely where their body is in space anymore.
Exactly, right.
Okay, so you might start to see kind of that. Like I said, this disorientation to time and place, right? That's one of the most common things. They'll think it's a different year, and it's not just that they don't know the year. They're really believing that they're living in 1980.
Right.
Right.
This is all moderate stage that we're.
Right. This is all moderate stage. Emotional outbursts.
Right.
So people sometimes think, and this kind of goes along with personality, mood, and behavior. So, what I want to say very briefly is that personality of someone with dementia, their personality does not change. It appears that it might be changing, but what that really is are kind of random neurons firing in the brain.
Right.
Right. So someone who is always anxious throughout their adulthood will probably continue to be anxious.
Exactly.
Right? Someone who is always paranoid will continue to be paranoid. But what you start to see is these kind of emotional outbursts. Some of it's anger, much of it is frustration, even if they don't understand why they're frustrated. They know they're frustrated. Moods start to change. Moods can get depressive. They can swing from high to low faster. These are things that all start to happen in this middle stage.
I think this is probably, you're talking about one aspect of dementia that is one of the hardest for care partners. Is that, it's just so hard because
it is, and you're right. And thanks for pointing that out. This is, this is where it becomes difficult, especially if this is someone that is your partner, your husband, your wife, your father, your mother, right, your sister, where it's very easy at this point to take things personally,
Absolutely.
right? Because you know them, you have a whole complicated history with them, so it feels like they're pressing your buttons.
That's right.
And the problem is, most of the time they're not actually pressing your buttons. Uh, they don't understand the consequences anymore, and they're not thinking about that. They're thinking they have behaviors because they're trying to tell you something, and they don't know how to tell you anymore.
Exactly. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'd like to teach a lot in this middle stage is to try to understand that every behavior has a reason. Right. And it's not just because they just kind of want to, give you a little push. Right.
Exactly.
It's because they're trying to tell you something and they can't do it.
Right. Right.
So this can be one of the most challenging in terms of interacting with the person with dementia. This stage can be very, very challenging.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the late stage, should I go on? I think the
Yes,
late,
probably not too much to say about that people don't really know, but go.
right. So the late stage is what people tend to think of as, they're no longer there, right? They don't have any quality of life, this kind of thing. And, this is kind of in some ways is one of the most important parts of the person's journey, because they actually are still there. That
Right.
amygdala is still working,
Mm.
right? So they can still feel all these emotions. And this is where it's very important to make sure that they are feeling safe and loved,
Yes.
because it's tempting to treat them as an object at this point. And they're not, they're humans.
Exactly.
And so late stage, you'll start to see, very briefly, health will start to deteriorate. Eating and swallowing become difficult. They're the part of the autonomous nervous system that helps you that tells you swallow. That part is actually being affected by dementia.
Right.
Okay. They're going to have very limited verbal communication, if at all, right? They will become purely incontinent, and it will not be urge incontinence, I need to go, but I can't get there. It will be they don't even know that they have gone.
Exactly.
Right. So that part of the brain that says, oh, this is going to happen, that has been damaged.
Right.
This is where they need kind of full assist with all activities of daily living: dressing, bathing, eating, moving. All right. And they seem to kind of withdraw into themselves. It often feels that they're very unaware of what is happening around them. And that's because they've kind of pulled in, although not on purpose, but there's nothing out there for them anymore because they can't understand it.
Right.
So they seem to kind of just not pay attention, fade away, not be present. This is where they become very sensory oriented.
Right.
So this is where that amygdala comes back, right? This is where touch and taste and smell, right, and music becomes so important.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, I can tell this really brief story about this person who lives where I work and is nonverbal. He's in a wheelchair. He doesn't move. And when we play the Beatles, his left foot starts to tap up and down.
Yeah.
And he's loved the Beatles all his life.
Right.
So we know that he is still there. That very person is still there.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And that's an important story. Such a good message, right? That they've pulled into their own world, but they are there.
They are there. They'll start to lose weight because they're not that interested in eating, and it's becoming difficult to swallow. This is where you'll start to, have a doctor say you really should be pureeing food.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You should be thickening liquids.
Yeah.
And then their ability to ambulate will deteriorate until it's non-existent.
Yeah.
So the ultimate, the end stage of Alzheimer's and other dementias right now is always death. Right. Often death will be caused by something else. It could be because they swallowed some food, but it went into their lungs. So they could get bacterial pneumonia.
Right.
Right. But in the end, their body, the autonomous body, the heart, everything just ceases to function.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Well, Lisa, thank you. And before we end, what could you say to caregivers, care partners about, what, I mean, it impacts all of us so deeply, and sometimes people don't really know what to expect. I mean, could you just sort of give them some idea? I know you told me don't expect anything, right?
So the tragedy of dementia, unfortunately, any kind, Alzheimer's or any of the other ones, is that there's no real roadmap, right? There's a broad understanding of how the brain is being impacted. And then with that, there is an understanding of what behaviors we might start to see and what points of deterioration we might start to see. But everyone who has any form of dementia will progress differently, slightly differently than anyone else. So the expectations are that you should not, don't put anything in stone. What you see today may be different tomorrow. What worked today as when you're talking to someone or as a behavior intervention may be different tomorrow. It's one of the hardest points for caregivers to kind of have to go through and understand, because it feels like you're absolutely really not in control. The one thing I will say is educate yourself, educate yourself, educate yourself. Join a support group if that is your thing. Find some people who have gone through this. This is not something that people who have never gone through this understand, because it's really not understandable. And who would think that this would really be happening to a brain? When someone is first diagnosed with Alzheimer's or some other form of dementia, I always urge the loved ones, the spouses, the children, to make sure that this is where you kind of get your financial and legal things in order, because the person is still capable of understanding and signing. Yeah. And once you reach a certain stage in this progression, they won't be able to do that anymore. So that's, right away, you want to make sure, is there a healthcare proxy? Do you understand what they want for, do not resuscitate? Do you have a financial power of attorney? Make sure those things are in place while you can still do this. Protect the assets then while they can still sign.
Right. Good advice. Very good advice. Yeah. Well, Lisa, I really appreciate this, and thank you so much. And so people can go on and to alzheimers.org and get a lot more information, presentations even from you, right? You're on there.
So you could go on to alzheimers.org, and they have 5 or 6 presentations at this point. They're all virtual. They're all free. Okay. And you can just kind of sign up for ones that you want. They take place by Zoom. And there also is an 800 number for the Alzheimer's Association. And if you just Google that, 800 number for the Alzheimer's, and they are there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They have experienced people who are available to take your call, answer your questions, help you find resources, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And they will talk to you about any dementia. It does not have to be Alzheimer's.
Good. I'm glad you brought that up.
Right.
Well, Lisa, I'm really grateful again. Thank you so much for this. Was there anything pressing that you feel like you left out?
No, thank you very much. The only thing I'd say is if you are a caregiver, you will not be perfect. You will not get it right all the time, and that is okay. No one does. There is no perfect caregiver. There is no perfect care partner. Cut yourself some slack.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.